Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yasodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Maharani ki jai, Gonitai ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning. We're reading from Canto 11, Chapter 6, and it's text 24. Is it 24? I think it's 25. It says 24, okay. Yani te charitani sha manushya sadhava kalau Shrinvanta kirtayantascha Tarishyanti anyasa tamaha Yani te charitani sha Manushya sadhava kalau Shrinvanta kirtayantascha Tarishyanti anjasatama Yani te charitam tanisha Manushya sadhava kalau Shrinvanta kirtayantascha Tarishyanti anyasatamaha. Please chant. Yani te charitanisha Manushya sadhava kalau Shrinvanta kirtayantascha Tarishyanti anyasatamaha. Yani te charitanisha Manushya sadhava kalau Shrinvanta kirtayantascha Tarishyanti anyasatama Yani te charitanisha Manushya sadhava kalau Shrinvanta kirtayantascha Tarishyanti anjasatama. Thank you very much for chanting. And the word-for-word translation and purport coming up, done by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. So the word-for-word, Yani, which, Te, your, Charitani, pastimes, Isha, O Supreme Lord, Manushya, humans, Sadhava, saintly persons, Kalau, in the degraded age of Kali, Shrinvanta, hearing, Kirtayanta, chanting, Cha, and Tarishyanti, they will cross over, Anjasa, easily, Tama, darkness. And the translation for this text 24 is as follows. My dear Lord, those pious and saintly persons who in the age of Kali hear about your transcendental activities and also glorify them will easily cross over the darkness of the age. So that's the demigods talking. And this is the purport. Unfortunately, in Kali Yuga, many persons are not attracted to the authorized Vedic literatures. Minimizing the transcendental process of hearing and chanting the glories of the personality of Godhead, they prefer to listen to useless and whimsical vibrations on the radio and television, in newspapers and magazines and so on, rather than hear about Krishna from the bona fide spiritual master. They endlessly give their own opinions about everything until they are dragged away by the force of time. After studying the temporary limited forms of the material world, they impatiently conclude that the absolute truth is formless. Such persons are actually worshipping Krishna's illusory energy Maya, who has been authorized to kick their stubborn heads. If instead people hear directly about Krishna from the bona fide sources, they will very easily solve all the problems of their lives. In Kali Yuga, people are constantly suffering from many psychological, social, economic, historical, political, and existential problems. But all these nightmarish problems can be removed as soon as one awakens to the transcendental reality of the personality of Godhead, who is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and beyond the bewildering manifestations of the material energy. The Lord appears within this universe so that people can observe, hear about, and glorify his actual activities. In this difficult age of Kali, we should all seriously take advantage of this opportunity. Om Gyana Timirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurin Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Svam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shah. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavanishvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Taribhya Shakripa Sindhubhe Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimata Romapada Swami Iti Namine. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll read the translation once again for this text 24. My dear Lord, those pious and saintly persons who in the age of Kali hear about your transcendental activities and also glorify them will easily cross over the darkness of this age. So, just looking at this particular purport done by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and the emphasis put on attending to different sources of entertainment or distraction. There was a survey that was done of radio listeners last year, and it was found that for the 7th consecutive year, it's personalities that overshadow even music as a main driver of broadcast listening. In addition, the radio strength, the AM, the FM, lay in its ability to connect with audiences and communities. So, very interesting, the emphasis on people responding to the particular personality that's talking. So this purport notes that in Kali Yuga, persons are not attracted to the authorized Vedic literatures. So the question naturally arises, how are we to live? So one may start to develop a general strategy or a path in life, and one may see examples of ways of life, and one may reject some of them for oneself, and one may become even perplexed and resort to superficial ways to deal with perplexities. So this whole breakdown of the different sources of distraction can fall into that category. It's superficial ways to deal with perplexities as one's trying to find a path in one's life. So there's this interesting conversation that takes place 1975, Srila Prabhupada in Bombay, and there's a devotee present, Yasomati Nandana, who tells Srila Prabhupada that he's been speaking with different pious persons, and they tell him that in the scriptures there's examples of rishis who ate meat. And further on in the conversation, he tells Srila Prabhupada that these same devotees are telling him that the current yogi that was very prominent at that time, Vivekananda, that he also ate meat and that he smoked. So this is this conversation is of interest because Srila Prabhupada, in the discussion, he brings the focus regarding who is actually a spiritual teacher. So we're looking at this idea that one's trying to form a path in life for oneself. So who is a spiritual teacher? And Srila Prabhupada states that a person has to understand the philosophy of Krishna consciousness much better before he can give up his beliefs about other gurus who can eat meat and smoke. So there has to be some sort of ability to grasp Krishna consciousness philosophy before they can actually move away from what their existing belief system is. And Srila Prabhupada quotes the following, and that may sound very practical. And Srila Prabhupada quotes the following because, there's this important question of who's the spiritual teacher. So Srila Prabhupada quotes from Bhagavad Gita 2:59, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasa varjam rasopi asya puram drishtva nivartate. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense enjoyment remains. But ceasing such engagement by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada states that unless one is transcendentally situated, it is not possible to cease one's sense enjoyment. So he makes a comparison that to restrict a person from sense enjoyment by rules and regulations is something like restricting a diseased person from having certain types of foodstuffs. The patient neither likes such a restriction, nor does he lose his taste for the particular foodstuffs. So the thirst for sense objects hasn't been destroyed. And Srila Baladev Vidyabhusan, he paints the comparative picture for the person who's realized Atma. So the term that was used in our text today was param drishtva, somebody who's experienced a superior thing. So the person who's realized Atma, that superior thing, which is superior to sense objects, which is full of self-manifesting bliss, even the taste or that thirst for sense objects is destroyed. So that's very interesting. This is the means for actually destroying that thirst for sense objects, actually realizing the existence of the soul. So another question may be asked on this topic of how are we to live? Because we're hearing that persons aren't much interested in Vedic literature, but still there's that need to form some path in life. So the question is it possible to be perfectly happy? So the response on the part of Prabhupada Yogendra, one of the 9 Yogendras earlier on in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we had looked at this in the 3rd chapter, he puts it this way, that one cannot find permanent happiness even on the heavenly planets, which one can attain in the next life through ritualistic ceremonies and sacrifices. And he gives an explanation of why this is so. And it's very interesting because he says, even in material heaven, the living entity is disturbed by rivalry with his equals and envy of those superior to him. And he gives a further reason why one cannot find permanent happiness in that place. And this is what he says: since one's residence in heaven is finished with the exhaustion of pious fruitive activities, the denizens of heaven are afflicted by fear, anticipating the destruction of that heavenly life. So, quite a difficult situation. The envy continues and fearfulness is present, even in a place of much advanced enjoyments. So there's, and this is all with this idea of, looking for being perfectly happy. Now there's a further examination of the question, is it possible to be perfectly happy? So the underlying understanding that the basis of material enjoyment lies in the body one has acquired. That's the underlying understanding. So it's the body that one's acquired is obviously the accumulated result of one's previous material activities. So if one's been awarded a body that has beauty, that has education, that has popularity, then, or even that it has strength, then the standard of material enjoyment can be high. By contrast, if the body that's been received has some ugliness, or there's some mental difficulty, some retardation perhaps, or there's some sort of defect of some sort, that makes the body not so attractive. Then one could say that material happiness might be lower, one may say. Of course, it all depends on one's views, but at any rate, on an external level. So by contrast, or one could say the common factor in both situations is the fact that the occupation in the particular body, be it that body endowed with all sorts of very attractive aspects or the less attractive aspects, still there's a temporary occupation in either body. So one could say there's a condition that needs to be met for eternal happiness. And that condition is one needs to be a lover of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna. So that love is described as the most exquisite ecstasy, millions of times greater than any pleasure in the material universe. So if this connection is not there, there may be two aspects operating in the personality of one looking for material enjoyment. So this is what transpires. Either there's self-pride or there's self-delusion. So, self-delusion means believing something that's not true about one's nature, one's abilities or feelings, and also rationalizing away anything that contradicts that belief. So this may take the form, even if one goes a little bit further, of some narcissistic traits, such as an inflated sense of self-importance, a constant need for admiration, accompanied by a lack of empathy for others, and a tendency to exploit others. So this may sound like a little extreme, because clearly it's a mental condition, but in actual fact, because of the age we're living in, one can, without fail, get exposed to this kind of unfortunate mental condition quite regularly. And some of the descriptive words that are used for this condition are a sense of entitlement and grandiosity. So this is very common in the present age. And on the internet, there's infinite videos of persons talking about how you deal with somebody having this mental condition. So this is all if one is in that state of not having shifted to a path where one is looking for a spiritual path and trying to connect to becoming a lover of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just that self-pride and the self-delusion. Now, self-pride is described in the purport today, and this is how it's described: endlessly give their own opinion about everything. And one may be exposed to such persons quite regularly. It's very common. Yes, if one actually is having to deal with that, then the best thing one can do is just say, I'm sure you know best what you need to do, or you know best what decision to make, because there isn't any opening. So in the purport today, there's mention that if persons directly hear about Krishna from a bona fide spiritual master, they will very easily solve all the problems of life. So again, we can consider the question, can one be perfectly happy? So there's a conclusion that's reached by Sri Prabhupada, again, the same Yogendra that I referenced earlier, and he says, any persons who seriously desire real happiness must seek a bona fide spiritual master and take shelter of him by initiation. So the qualification of the bona fide guru is that he has realized the conclusions of the scriptures by deliberation and is able to convince others of these conclusions. So such great personalities who have taken shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they've left aside all material considerations. So those are the persons that they are understood to be bona fide spiritual masters. So that particular statement is coming again in the 3rd chapter of the 11th canto that we're on. So this statement by Prabhupada Yogendra is in fact the definition used by Srila Prabhupada of the perfect spiritual master. That was that conversation that I was referencing earlier in Bombay. So transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. And that definition was given too. So the possibility of approaching the Supreme Lord exists with this step. One embarks then on a process of knowledge. So taking to the devotional service of the Lord via hearing about him. So that's that path that one's embarking upon. It's a path of acquiring knowledge, you could say, or realizing knowledge. And serving the Supreme Lord via hearing about him. Then knowledge develops within one. So the items of knowledge develop within one, and those are humility. So notice, that's the first, it's considered an item of knowledge. The self-pride, the self-delusion drops away. So one is not looking to be honored by others any longer. So it's quite an extraordinary shift of consciousness when one considers the heavy mental condition that's present in many persons in the present time. That just taking to this process of hearing, the first thing that comes is this humility, that suddenly there's no anxiety to be honored by others. The next thing that happens is there's pridelessness. Imagine, it just drops away, that self-pride, that one has an opinion about everything and considers oneself so knowledgeable about everything. It just drops away. One actually becomes prideless. It's extraordinary. So these are all considered items of knowledge. This is actually knowledge that just through the hearing process, one is losing those aspects of consciousness that are so devastatingly destructive to one's own self. That self being that understanding of one being the soul. Tolerance begins to develop. So no longer is one actually impatient at not getting what one wants. But actually, there's tolerance. Everything is in order. And then very many interesting other qualities are there, such as cleanliness, steadiness, the absence of false ego. So this is a very extraordinary one, because the ego is that whole identification, the picture one builds up of oneself, one's capacities, one's abilities, one's status. And it's such a vulnerable kind of picture because it's self-created to a large extent, but it's also acting as a barrier to being on the path of Krishna consciousness. So just having taken shelter of the spiritual master is giving one the key to start dropping that identity, to start wearing down that identity, that false ego. And then, of course, one actually comes to perceive directly that it's actually an evil to imagine being born again. It's actually having to go through old age with the gradual disintegration of one's physical abilities and even possibly one's mental abilities. One understands it's actually an evil thing, as is disease, which are all part of having a material body. And then also there's a sense of detachment that comes from one's attachments possibly to persons that one is close to, such as one's children, one's spouse, one's home. And the interesting thing is that the mind starts to even out. So it actually is no longer very disturbed by something unpleasant that happens or very delighted by something pleasant that happens. It's just very even. understanding things very objectively. And of course, there's that cultivation of the constant and unalloyed devotion to the Supreme Lord that's going on at the same time through the hearing process. These items of knowledge are very extraordinary because it paints a whole picture of the way of life and the incredible boons that are there from just taking to the shelter of the lotus feet of the spiritual master. One actually becomes also detached from the general mass of people. So it means that one is quite clear about the path one's following on and isn't so, cajoled into trying to aspire for all the things that the general mass of people are aspiring for. There's a detachment. And one accepts the importance of the path of self-realization and this philosophical search for the absolute truth. One actually accepts it, that it's a very important thing. So this is all to paint the picture of what being perfectly happy looks like. So all this knowledge, or these shifts that happen in one's consciousness, in how one's mind is operating, how one's false ego is being whittled away, it all comes from hearing about the Supreme Lord. Of course, as we're doing via Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita. So one actually starts to develop a taste for Krishna consciousness, and at the same time loses a taste for things that are very pale in comparison. And the whole listing was there in the purport. The newspapers, magazines, television, podcasts, videos, all these various things that are very pale in comparison. It means that yearning for those things isn't there. So this was a short examination of this verse, but this was what came from just looking at the purport. If there's anything that comes to mind to expand the discussion, please feel free.
That microphone is about to run out of battery.
Yes, so it is.
The process that you explain, and which is described quite vividly in terms of the process of knowledge, that by hearing and chanting, when one takes to that process, this mental, Kali Yuga mental problem of delusion, self-delusion, and also pride becomes addressed, and eliminated like that. I mean, gradually eliminated, but the picture is that, once you take into the process of hearing and chanting, you are addressing that. Mm-hmm. And when we get exposed to that, then you become quite inspired. Yes, let me take to this process. But very often, when we come into the community of those who are taking to that process sincerely, you become aware that indeed there is all those ill things of pride and self-delusion are quite prominent. And not only that, sometimes quite overwhelming in one sense, So it questions, it's almost like there is a promise of a place in which you're going to find you're safe from that exposure that you have in the material world. Sometimes, often, you hear expressions within the devotee community that you find yourself better treated outside than inside
Oh dear.
the devotee community. I mean, often you hear that. Even you hear it, described by spiritual masters, in terms of the way the principles of humility, tolerance, and respect are being constantly trampled, the experience of being trampled within a community of devotees. So, how would you, talk about that or explain that?
Yeah, in Western philosophy, there's this idea that it's very difficult to see the other. You can't really see another person, which is an interesting idea, that you're actually so caught in your own reality that you do not see another person. And certainly the devotee in the early stages of taking to a path of attempting to become a lover of the Supreme Lord in the Kanishta stage is only seeing the deity. So it's very much that thing of you do not see others. You only see your own reality. So the picture you have of yourself, the pride you have in yourself, that's the picture you're holding, and that's what you're seeing. You cannot see others. It's a whole blockage. And so in that stage, one can understand that operating with the false ego very prominent, there's going to be an inability to be properly respectful to someone else, or an inability to be tolerant of someone else. And this is very common if one's been in a devotee community for a long time. Sometimes it even takes, what should one say, the most insignificant little irritation or irritating behavior on the part of someone to set off the false ego and the self-pride so that it erupts, and suddenly there's many persons involved and caught up in a whole drama, and it's completely insignificant, whatever the little perception was of somebody else's fault. And it becomes a huge drama, and even polarized sides start happening. And this is all that kind of very early stage of devotional life, the complete inability to see another person. And then with gradual progress in devotional life, where one is gradually being elevated through the blessings of the spiritual master because of one's sincerity and dedication to trying to please the Supreme Lord, please Him through service, one can come to a point where one is actually able to see others. One is actually able to interact with others, and that's that Madhyama stage, which is such a contrast, because there's natural compassion that comes for those that are still caught in that false ego and caught in that prideful state. So the persons in that particular transcendental position have that responsibility to, in some sense, be role models for those that are still aspirants and, unable to deal with others, basically unable to deal with others. So that role modeling has to be one of very respectful dealing, very kind dealing, very protective towards those that are in the lower position. And one of the biggest problems that happens is if somebody's in a position of control in the devotional realm, but the person hasn't come to the proper transcendental qualification, and then the devastation that gets caused by a person in that position, particularly because the self-pride and the false ego is operating so strongly, and that inability to actually connect with others or see others means that there's complete insensitivity to somebody else's reality. So very unkind acts can be performed if one's been put artificially or somehow in a position of power and control but doesn't have the proper qualification. And then you even find that all the work that's gone into building up some structured area in all the different areas that are in devotional life and part of serving the community and serving the deities, even a whole area will be devastated in one foul swoop because a person is completely oblivious to actually the reality of another person and everything that makes up another person's reality, even though it's maybe graphically visible, person cannot see. So that's where the greatest danger lies, that somebody who isn't properly transcendently qualified gets put into a position where they are overseeing others, but actually they have that blockage of the self-pride and the self-delusion. Then it is really devastating because the proper behavior isn't modeled, the proper care isn't given to those that are also on that path of devotional life. So that's just one thought. And it's based on some experience too. So, yeah. Yeah, and it's not uncommon, this thing of, coming onto the devotional path and the self-delusion being very, very strong. It's actually surprisingly in one sense, and then in another sense, devastatingly real, that it exists, and if such persons are given free rein, there's so much damage that gets done.
Hare Krishna, Mathaji. Thank you for your class. So I'm wondering, what you're speaking about seems to be like the normal, how they say, just things as usual. This goes on like this. Anartha nivritti. People have anarthas. People go through so much stuff. But I'm wondering if, above everything, if we did more kirtan, would that help the situation?
Oh, well, both hearing and chanting are remedial measures. So they're both remedial measures, both hearing about Krishna and chanting. So performing kirtan, personal chanting, those are all remedial measures. So yes, indeed, that actually goes a long way to kind of cleanse the heart and allow for self-reflection that then allows for a person to become more conscious of their the subtle reality that they're carrying with them and how it's affecting others. So yeah, one has to actually take to the remedial measures, without a doubt. Yeah. And it's it does require a supportive environment, just an overall supportive environment of persons that, there are persons who have maturity in the process and are actually protective and supportive of those that are less mature, and can somehow help to prevent the fireworks going off left, right, and center. Yeah. So thank you very much for your very kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.